My neighbors began to decay even while still alive. I thought I was hallucinating. I saw Mr. Davies across the street, an old man over 80, walk out to his mailbox. He raised his arm, revealing a handless limb. The wrist was a gruesome mess of flesh, with yellow bone protruding from black, decaying tissue. I witnessed this horrifying sight from my window, where I often stared blankly while sipping my morning coffee. I frequently saw Bill leave his house to check his mail and retrieve the newspaper from the end of his driveway, a mundane weekend ritual we both shared. But this Saturday, he didn't get the newspaper. He simply stared at his hand for a moment, seemingly unfazed by his exposed, bony wrist as if it were a minor scratch. Then, with his intact left hand, he reached into the mailbox, grabbed his severed right hand by the wrist, still clutching a few letters, and walked back inside. I ran straight into the kitchen and told Sarah what I had just seen. I knew what I was saying sounded insane, but I was certain of what I had witnessed. Sarah looked up at me from her cereal bowl as if I were a clown. His hand fell off. A small laugh escaped her lips. Yes, he reached into the mailbox and pulled out a bony, severed wrist. She was silent for a moment, shaking her head and chuckling. I don't get it. Is this why you never tell jokes, David? You're terrible at them. I'm not joking. My wife's laughing expression shifted to genuine worry. You look absolutely pale, she said, standing up and feeling my forehead. She checked me all over. Are you sick? I'm fine, I don't know. My surroundings started to spin a little. I felt dizzy. I sat down. Sarah stared at me, biting her lip, a habit she had when deep in thought. Usually, I found it undeniably cute. Even 2 years into our marriage, it was adorable, but at that moment, it only annoyed me. I knew my wife was worried I was losing my mind. How could I possibly? I started. It's nothing, she said, rubbing my shoulder. Just relax. I think your eyes are playing tricks on you. You just woke up, you're still half asleep. People's limbs don't just fall off for no reason. I didn't say anything. Here, eat your breakfast. You can't function without coffee, no matter how hard you try. I pulled my cereal bowl closer. I could see her subtly biting her lip, wondering what the hell was happening to me, but I didn't care much. I couldn't stop thinking about Bill and his hand. I wished my eyes had deceived me, but they hadn't. I knew what I had seen. The empty space above Bill's wrist where his hand should have been, and the bone protruding from what looked like decomposing flesh. The next morning, I stood staring intently out the window, waiting for Bill to check his mailbox. I couldn't shake what I'd seen yesterday. I would have gone out to investigate if I didn't think it would make Sarah even more worried about my sanity. But I needed to see Bill. Would he come out this time with his right hand intact? Had I been hallucinating? Or would he appear with a bandaged stump? There was another question that had haunted me for too long, making me sick to my stomach. Why was he so eerily calm about losing a hand? I checked the clock. Bill would be out in a few minutes. I nervously bounced my leg. Bill's next-door neighbor, Gary Nelson, was already outside watering his garden. The Nelsons, Gary and Natasha, were a reclusive couple in their late 50s, known for being incredibly rude. Gary was rather short and plump, with no discernible neck. On the rare occasions I saw Natasha, she was a perpetually scowling, unpleasant-looking woman. They had a terrible reputation with almost everyone in the neighborhood. Nobody had a single good word to say about them. Sarah and I had an unpleasant run-in with them during our first week here. The morning after our housewarming party, I found a complaint letter from Gary and Natasha on our doorstep. It stated they had reported us to the Homeowners Association and would call the police if we partied all night again. Those lines were a shortened, more polite version of what they actually wrote, with fewer expletives directed at us. It was quite an overreaction, as our party was relatively quiet and ended before midnight. Bill opened his door, pulling me back to reality. He walked to the mailbox, both his hands exactly where you'd expect them to be. I shook my head. It can't be. I still didn't doubt what I'd seen. Something like that couldn't be a misperception. I had to confront him. I had to find out what happened. I rushed outside to check my own mailbox. Bill looked at me. I waved, and he smiled back warmly. Bill and Angie were the complete opposite of Gary and Natasha. Angie had cooked dinner for us for a whole week when we first moved in. "We've moved many times," she had said, bringing us a stack of Tupperware containers. "I know cooking is the last thing you want to do after a long day of unpacking." And Bill had helped me fix the wooden planters in front of our house after the previous owner left them in disrepair. He truly had a green thumb, and thanks to him, we now had a beautiful garden instead of a mess. Good morning, I said to Bill as I crossed the street. Oh, good morning. I'm glad it's finally warmed up after such a long winter. Your flowers are looking lovely. Right, I said. Thanks for your help with them, I really appreciate it. You've thanked me enough already. I subtly glanced at his right hand. He was wearing a long-sleeved shirt, even though it was a warm 28 degrees Celsius, but I could still see a bandage wrapped around his wrist, peeking out from beneath his cuff. Just seeing the bandage made my heart pound. But it was his right hand itself that chilled me. It was pale, lifeless, as if it hadn't seen sunlight in years, a stark contrast to his other hand, which was tanned and speckled with brown spots. Not only that, but his right hand seemed paralyzed, unmoving, as if it were a prosthetic. His fingers didn't even twitch. You all right there, son? He asked. You look quite ill all of a sudden. I swallowed nervously, my throat suddenly dry. Oh, just a bit of acid reflux. I tried to smile, but it came out as a strained grimace. Bill's eyes were fixed on me with a suspicious stare. I suddenly wanted to go home. I really wanted to leave. That pale, dead hand at his side truly unnerved me. There was something very wrong with this old man, and his sharp gaze triggered every instinct in me to scream and run far away. Just as I was about to excuse myself to leave, Bill turned to look at Gary, then leaned towards me, resting against his mailbox, and lowered his voice. Look who's trying to eavesdrop, he said. Gary had moved closer to us, standing right at the dividing line between his garden and Bill's with his back to us. But it was a flimsy pretense. He wasn't even trying to hide his eavesdropping. They're always worried people are talking about them, Bill continued. No surprise there. Backbitters are as rotten as the people they talk about. Have I told you about the cat incident? Bill ignored Gary. I shook my head. Well, a few years before you and Sarah moved in, there was another family living here. Not the family that sold you the house, but one before them. They had a cat that used to run around outside. You know how those cats are, right? They make messes everywhere. This particular cat had a passion for pooping in Gary and Natasha's garden. I know it's annoying, cat poop does smell terrible, but it doesn't justify what they did. What did they do? I asked. Bill leaned closer to me, lowering his voice even further. Gary was still watering that patch of grass for an unusually long time, but I didn't think he could hear what we were about to discuss. They poisoned the cat. One day, it just dropped dead, blood flowing from its nose and mouth. The bastards. I saw them at the convenience store a few days before the cat died, and I saw them put a bottle of rat poison in their shopping cart. I didn't think much of them buying rat poison until that poor cat died. My God, did anyone say anything to them? Bill shrugged. What do you think anyone could do? I and everyone else couldn't prove they killed the cat, and the police have more important cases than animal cruelty. But everyone knew those bastards killed the cat. He shook his head sadly. The kids in that family were so upset. They loved that cat. It was a good cat, too, not one of those crazy ones that would scratch you just because it felt like it. Anyway, that family moved out right after that incident. Can't blame them. Of course not, that's horrible. They're clearly despicable bastards. He moved even closer to me, so close I could smell the medication on his breath, and something else, something unpleasant like rotting meat. But don't you worry, young man, Bill said, his tone laced with malice. They'll get their comeuppance soon enough. Sarah was sitting with her arms crossed, biting her lip, waiting for me to come home. David, did you just go and ask Bill if his hand fell off? No, but he has a bandage wrapped around his wrist. So what? Maybe he cut himself. Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence after what I saw? I genuinely think I know what I saw, and I'm sure something very strange is happening. My wife shook her head in frustration. I think if I were you, I'd act the exact same way. Our conversation was truly insane. I really hope you're not losing your mind, she said with a strained laugh, then went upstairs, circling her index finger around her temple, implying I was crazy. But just 3 days later, my wife had an unusual encounter with Bill's wife, Angie, and we both realized something very wrong was happening with our friendly neighbors across the street. They were decaying, rotting right before our eyes. Sarah came home late that evening after work, looking as pale as a ghost. My wife could only stammer a few words when I asked her what had happened. I sat her down and got her a glass of water, which her hand still trembled when she held it. I just saw Angie, she said. I saw her sitting on the porch steps when I had just parked. What you saw a few days ago flashed through my mind. I was going to go over and ask if everything was okay. I thought she'd say it was nothing and help you stop thinking nonsense. So I went to talk to her and... All right, it's okay. I tried to calm her, smoothing the hair on her sweaty forehead. My wife took a sip of water before continuing. As I got closer, she was standing with her back to me. I saw her sprinkling salt in a line around the house. I asked her what she was doing, and she mumbled about preparing to keep stray spirits out. She repeated that phrase several times, her voice hoarse and weak. I asked if she was okay, but she ignored me, so I lightly touched her shoulder. She jumped as if she hadn't known I was there, and then she turned around and looked at me and... Sarah covered her face and screamed. Oh, it was disgusting. All right, it's okay. What happened? She had no eyes, her eyes were completely gone. There were maggots crawling out of the empty sockets. She even had a large hole in her cheek. I could even see her teeth. And the horrible smell? My wife screamed again. I almost shrieked when I saw her face. I told her she needed to go to the hospital, but when I took out my phone to call an ambulance, she grabbed my hand and forced me not to call. Did she hurt you? No, but she wasn't gentle either. She said she was really fine, that I had to believe everything would be okay, but she absolutely refused to let me call for help, saying it really wasn't necessary. She made me promise I wouldn't call an ambulance, and I just wanted to run home right then, so I promised I wouldn't call anything. God, what the hell is going on? I don't know, but you were right. Something is very strange. I thought I would go over there and try to figure out what was happening. Although the thought of confronting those two in their current state made me sick to my stomach, I felt it was necessary. They had terrified Sarah, and that made me somewhat angry. My first instinct was to protect her, to understand what was happening, to try and fix it. But Sarah held my arm tightly. Don't go, what if they hurt you? And what if they don't? What if they're just sick and need help? Then why wouldn't they let me call an ambulance? How should I know? Maybe they're scared or they're accepting their illness. Sarah bit her lip. What if it's contagious? Then it's too late for us. We've already been in contact with them. My wife nodded weakly. Listen, I believe we'll be okay. But I think I need to go over there to find out what's happening to them and maybe persuade them to call an ambulance. I don't think you should do that, darling. And perhaps my wife was right. A voice in my head whispered, something beyond your comprehension is happening and you shouldn't get involved. But no, I had to get to the bottom of this. I needed to for our safety. You're a great persuader, you know that? You persuaded me to marry you, she said with a light laugh. Your jokes are truly terrible. I was glad to see my wife smile, even if only for a brief moment. Then I pulled my hand away from hers and, despite our fears, walked to the Davies house. The sun had just set and the light was fading fast. The house across the street looked darker than ever. Curtains were drawn, the porch light was off, even the motion sensor security light wasn't on. The streetlights to my right flickered with crackling electrical sounds. Birds shrieked, flying in flocks across the twilight sky. In the distance, behind the Davies house, a storm was approaching. Dark clouds loomed menacingly in the sky. Everything was painted in an ominous scene. Occasionally, the clouds would flash with blinding lightning. A full-blown storm was rumbling in. Trees rustled violently in the strong wind. I shivered with fear as I approached their door. I knocked, but no one answered. I looked back at my house and saw my wife's blurry silhouette watching me from the window. I knew she was biting her lip, her mind racing with all the possibilities. We waved to each other. I continued knocking. A strong gust of wind snapped a branch off a tree. I heard the broken branch crash onto the roof. From inside, there was a groan, a thud as if a chair had fallen to the floor. Then shuffling footsteps approached the door. The door creaked and groaned open, revealing a figure standing in the darkness on the other side. What is it, David? It was Bill. His voice was very sick and hoarse. He was breathing heavily. The stench hit me straight in the face, identical to the repulsive smell of roadkill. I almost gagged. Bill, are you okay? Sarah and I are a bit worried about you and Angie. He chuckled, a cough-like laugh, exactly like someone with lung cancer. I peered closer to see him better, but it was too dark for my eyes to make anything out. I know I don't look okay, but Angie and I will be fine. We'll live. No need to worry about us. And then the horrifying sight was revealed. I recoiled, trying not to gasp, but my mouth hung open in shock. His face looked like it was melting. His cheeks sagged. A piece of flesh dangled from his chin, his jawbone completely exposed. His nose was gone. In its place was an empty, dark hole. "Bill, I think I should call an ambulance." He waved his hand to interrupt me. His fingers were black and putrid, as if suffering from severe frostbite. Exposed bone protruded from the middle and index fingers of his hand. "Thank you for your concern, but you won't and will never fully understand what's happening. We are fine, and you and your wife must believe us. I have a lot more experience than you, young man, much more than you think. So trust me when I tell you and your wife to leave us alone." He coughed, and something dark and glistening flew out of his throat and splattered onto the floor. He paid no attention to it. He said, "Don't make us do what we'll regret." "Bill, what is really going on?" I had stepped further away from him. "Go, you don't need to worry, and you'll understand life a little better by morning." He slammed the door shut in my face. His warning words repeated in my head, "Leave us alone. Don't make us do what we'll regret." The words sent shivers down my spine. I stood there, feeling truly small and useless. All the confidence I had before confronting him evaporated in an instant. I could feel the weight in his words, the tone of his voice. He looked frail, old, and putrid, just like a corpse. But I could feel a power radiating from him, a strange, mysterious power that made me want to run far away and never return. I might not understand what was happening, but I knew one thing: I would heed his warning. Sarah and I couldn't sleep that night. How could we? We lay in bed together as it poured outside, watching some random movie on Netflix that I'm sure neither of us paid attention to. In the darkness, sometimes I heard a faint sound that I thought was someone's muffled scream, tearing through the rain and storm. I immediately looked at Sarah, and her eyes told me she had definitely heard it too. We got out of bed and looked out the front window in fear. We could see the Davies house was no longer completely dark. Instead, a bright orange candlelight glowed through the windows. A lightning bolt struck very close to their house, so close that the thunder reached us in half a second, and then another muffled scream. This time, the scream was longer, very painful and desperate, and it again came from the Davies house. 2 more flashes of light followed in quick succession, but these weren't lightning. They came from inside the Davies house. A white light flickered from their windows for an instant. Another lightning strike, and then the house went completely dark again. The candles had been extinguished. The house stood there, under the torrential rain and the flickering light of the streetlights, dark and silent for a moment. The way the darkened windows seemed to stare back at us, the way the broken trees around the house made it even more eerie with their snapped branches, the way the front door, with its broken latch, swung back and forth in the strong wind, that house looked truly sinister. "What is going on?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't ask me." We continued watching for a while longer, but nothing else happened. The storm began to subside. We returned to our bedroom, wondering why this was happening to us. Life had been so normal. Our marriage was perfect. Our new house was great. Most of our neighbors were friendly. And now this was threatening everything I had. We stayed awake all night, leaving the lights on, too shocked to sleep until the sun rose. The last drops of rain had vanished, and the birds began their morning song. That's when there was a knock at the door. We knew for sure it was Bill and Angie. Who else could it be? Sarah and I, still in our pajamas, went to open the door. Our eyes were dark-rimmed, and our faces were pale from not sleeping for over a day. I wondered if we would even recognize Bill and Angie now, or if they would look like completely decomposed corpses. But what we saw was the complete opposite. They looked surprisingly vibrant and healthy. They greeted Sarah and me with warm smiles. All traces of decay and putrefaction had vanished. Not only that, but they looked significantly younger than before. Not just younger from getting a good night's sleep, they looked 25 to 30 years younger. They looked like 2 completely different people. "Angie and I wanted to thank you too for your concern and understanding," Angie began. Her skin looked smoother, clearer. Her hair was thick and dark again, and she had her eyes back. "Yes, thank you for not interfering with our business," Bill added. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt, and I could see that his right hand was moving and fully functional. He wasn't completely bald anymore, although he still had a receding hairline, and like Angie, his previously aged skin had become smoother, with fewer and shallower wrinkles. We shouldn't have let you two see us in that state. We looked quite terrible, didn't we? They continued. Yes, this sometimes happens when we get a little complacent. It happens when you reach our age. Bill winked after his last sentence. You two have been very kind to us since you moved in, Angie smiled brightly. Her teeth looked completely natural, not the usual dentures you'd expect. You know what? When you two first moved in, we thought you'd make excellent sacrifices, so young and healthy. I froze. Sarah pressed close to me. Sacrifices, what are they talking about? But you two were too kind for us to do that, Bill said. Well, some people around here aren't so kind, Angie said, turning to look at the Nelsons' house and nodding slightly. Exactly, and perhaps they are the best sacrifices in this neighborhood. Older than you two, Bill added. Sacrifices, I couldn't stop thinking about that word. They were the most deserving sacrifices, Angie said. They both chuckled jovially, while Sarah and I couldn't even manage a strained laugh. We were speechless. Well, it's time for us to go, they said. As you might guess, you won't be seeing us around here anymore. It wouldn't be safe for us to stay. Questions about the Nelsons will start to arise, Angie said. And we hope you two won't breathe a word to the police, all right? You mustn't say anything about what you saw, Bill added, his voice chilling me to the bone again. Sarah and I nodded. Good, they both said, and they smiled again. But this time, I couldn't tell if it was a friendly smile or a threatening one. We won't forget you two. We know you'll have a happy family together, Angie said the last two sentences, and then they left. Sarah and I slumped onto the sofa, unable to comprehend what had just happened. We couldn't utter a single word for a long time. Keep stray spirits out, Sarah suddenly mumbled. What? That's what Angie said when she was sprinkling salt around the house last night. Sarah turned to me, and they just kept repeating sacrifices. I think they wanted to keep the stray spirits out in case they stole their sacrifices. Everything began to click into place. The Nelsons were the sacrifices, I blurted out. Exactly, look at them now. They look as young as Gary and Natasha. They used them as sacrifices, didn't they? Sacrificed them to stop the decay, to stop their own aging process. And then the pieces fit together. They had gone from decaying to young and healthy. They talked about sacrifices. They talked about Gary and Natasha being deserving sacrifices, the candles inside their house, the muffled screams, the two flashes of light from inside the house. They had sacrificed Gary and Natasha to gain their youth, to stop their own bodies from decaying, and to continue living. And who knows how many others they had sacrificed before that, or how long they had been on this earth. Or how long they would continue to do this. Like vampires, living for centuries on end. They could only decay and rot like ancient things themselves until they sacrificed someone. Oh my God, David, I think you're right. She bit her lip and stared at the blank TV screen for a moment. Whoever they are, whatever they found a way to become immortal. My wife looked me straight in the eyes, very seriously. We can't tell the police. If we do, we'll be their next targets. I nodded. You don't need to remind me. We never saw Bill and Angie again. That afternoon, a white truck arrived at their house, and strange men began loading Bill and Angie's belongings into the vehicle before driving away. The house was abandoned. The Nelsons had been missing for over 2 months, of course, since that stormy night. Detectives were sent to investigate. They asked Sarah and me and our other neighbors if we had seen or heard anything about them. Of course, we said no. They asked if we knew why the Davies had abandoned their house without selling it, or why they had vanished without a trace. Of course, we said we didn't know. The detectives asked us to contact them if we saw or heard anything unusual, but of course, we would remain silent. My wife was right. Bill and Angie had been kind enough not to harm us once, but perhaps they wouldn't be so kind if we gossiped to the police, even if the police didn't believe us. Who would? I still think this is the right thing to do. Sarah and I will continue to heed the Davies' words. Sometimes, being kind pays off. Don't ever drive off that road. That was the first rule I had written down. The road was rough and unforgiving. I gripped the steering wheel so frantically that veins protruded distinctly on my forearms. I was driving along a narrow dirt track, riddled with potholes and fallen branches, a testament to its infrequent use. Trees on either side showered, encroaching over the road and completely blocking any starlight from the dark sky above. Everything was pitch black, and without my car's headlights, I wouldn't have been able to see anything. I drove slowly, due to this crude excuse for a road. Occasionally, it would abruptly swerve, often hidden beneath a thick pile of leaves, and before I could trace its outline from afar, I hoped I wouldn't veer into a ditch from which I couldn't extract the car. My headlights illuminated a thick grove of trees ahead, and I knew I had reached the end of the road. I slowed down, then stopped completely, scanning the area from left to right to ensure I hadn't missed an entrance. I turned the ignition key, and the engine died, leaving me in an eerie silence. The light vanished, abandoning me to the profound darkness until I managed to manually switch my lights back on. In that moment of blackness, a shiver ran down my spine. I took out my wallet and pulled out Alina's photo. She was smiling, a calm, reassuring smile that could uplift even the gloomiest spirits. Back then, she was so vibrant, so full of life. This was my favorite picture of her. Her face was flushed from the cold. We had gone on a trip to Iceland, a place Alina wanted to visit more than anywhere else. It was her birthday, and I had surprised her with a pair of tickets. Alina was ecstatic when I told her about the plan. She spent 2 solid hours online researching where I had booked. She always appreciated small gestures and gifts, so something like this sent her to the moon. 2 days later, we were on an overnight cruise off Reykjavik, searching for the Northern Lights. It was Alina's first time seeing them, so she was incredibly excited as she gazed at the green and white streaks spreading across the night sky, shaped like a giant beast. They blended with the countless endless stars. A wide grin stretched across her face. "Look, David," she pointed, her cheeks rosy from the cold, her steady breaths fogging and dissipating into the air. She fumbled with her phone and her gloves and started taking some pictures. "See, aren't you glad I bought you those touchscreen gloves?" I asked. "Yes, they're great. I don't have to take them off and put them back on every time I see something interesting, and things like that happen here every few minutes." She snapped a picture of me. "Let's take one together," she said. I wrapped my arm around her, and she pouted playfully as she took a picture of us both with the Northern Lights behind us. I kissed her, and she took another picture like that. "Let me take one of you," I said, taking her phone. Alina took off her winter hat and stood by the railing at the bow of the ship, placing her hands behind her on the barrier and tilting her head slightly, smiling at the camera. I took a few pictures, and I distinctly remember thinking how lucky I was to have her. I handed her back her phone, and we once again faced the green light stretching into the sky, unblinking. The hushed whispers of other tourists around us filled the air, each group communicating in their own language. "Do you think we'll ever come back here someday?" Alina asked, clumsily pulling her hat back on, covering her ears. "I thought you hated the cold," I teased, grinning. "But David, it's so beautiful." Her sentence was cut short by a cough. "Honey, are you okay?" She nodded, clearing her throat. That was the beginning of our struggle. I put the photo back into my jacket's breast pocket, then pulled out the crumpled, folded piece of paper from my wallet. I carefully unfolded it and read what was written in sloppy handwriting. "When you reach the end of the road, leave the car, but keep the headlights on. Start a timer and walk in a straight line until you find a narrow cave entrance. If 5 minutes have passed and you still haven't found the entrance, follow the car lights back and try again." I knew this passage by heart, word for word, because I had read it countless times. But I had to be sure. I couldn't mess this up. Everything depended on it. I folded the paper and put it in my jeans pocket. I opened the glove compartment and took out my flashlight, clicking it on to check if it worked. I got out of the car, leaving the keys in the ignition. There would be no thieves here, not in this inhospitable forest. When I opened the car door, I expected to hear animal sounds, crickets chirping, something like that, but there was nothing. Everything was so deafeningly silent that I felt compelled to clear my throat just to check if I hadn't gone deaf. Something was seriously wrong here. I could feel it in the heavy stillness that enveloped the air. I scanned the thicket with my flashlight, just to reassure myself that nothing was lurking behind a tree. Once calm, I turned back towards my car, set the timer, and began to walk. The rustling of leaves under my every step echoed through the space. I carefully stepped forward, cautious not to stumble into a hidden hole and sprain my ankle. The beams from my car illuminated a good distance ahead, but they gradually faded and then disappeared completely, leaving me with only my flashlight as the sole source of light in the vast darkness of the forest. I tried my best to avoid looking around, fearing I might accidentally stray off course. I glanced at the timer, 36 minutes left. Less than half the time. I hurried, stepping through thick layers of dry leaves and broken branches. My breath synced with the symphony of rustles and cracks. I suddenly remembered the long hikes I used to take with Alina. She loved outdoor activities. "Honey, I need to rest," I said, panting halfway up a steep hill. Alina turned to look at me, looking no more tired than if she'd been on a light jog. "Tired already, huh? Come on." She put her hands on her hips and shifted her weight to one leg. "You definitely should have jogged with me all those mornings." I chuckled breathlessly. "I only need twice a week." "Twice a week is twice what you actually do," she said. She came closer and took my hand, playfully tossing her head towards the top of the hill. "We're almost at a bench. We can rest there." And she leaned in and whispered, "Maybe a little kiss too?" The hill climb suddenly became much more appealing, and in just a few minutes we were on a raised section. We took off our backpacks and sat close together on a bench. "David, I just wanted to say I really appreciate you doing these things with me," she said, placing her hand on my thigh. "What are you talking about, baby? I love these things." And it was true. Anything, even something utterly unappealing, became much more interesting with Alina. Whether it was watching a movie at home, visiting family members I detested, hiking, or even exercising. "Well, you'll have to train harder if you don't want me to leave you for the bears to eat." She leaned closer. "Honey, I survived you, let alone a bear," I said, and she gasped in mock shock. I brushed the hair from Alina's face and kissed her. She could barely finish her sentence between kisses and turned her face away, placing her hand over her mouth and starting to cough. It was a dry, painful cough that made my own lungs ache just to hear it. "You've been coughing like that too much lately. We really need to schedule a doctor's visit, seriously." She coughed lightly a few more times, then cleared her throat. "All right, okay, I'll do it. First thing Monday, I promise." She gave me a reassuring smile. 4:30, not much time left, and I really didn't want to waste another 5 minutes going back and repeating the steps. I shuffled through the leaves, a growing sense of unease threatening to take control of my body. 4:33, still nothing but endless darkness and trees. Wait, something far ahead. My flashlight beam reflected off something at the end, instead of continuing to disappear into the blackness ahead. Invigorated, I sped up and realized I was staring at a sheer cliff face. The massive, jagged, uneven rock face filled my vision both above and to either side. As I gently moved my light to the left, I saw a small gap, a little wider than myself. It opened into a darkness my flashlight couldn't penetrate. The gap made my breathing quicken, feeling as if I would never find my way back if I entered. I slowly approached and explored it from a safe distance. Even from here, the light couldn't pierce the darkness at the entrance. I should have been able to see the adjacent wall right inside, but there was nothing. It was as if my light was abruptly blocked at the cave entrance by an invisible, pitch-black barrier. The timer beeped loudly, startling me. I turned it off. I took out the paper again and read the next line 3 times, my eyes scanning the sentence repeatedly. "Be sure before you step inside, for once you do, there is no turning back." Of course, I understood that, but an uncomfortable feeling urged me not to rely solely on my memory. That's why I had written everything down. I wouldn't allow myself to mess this up. I might never get a second chance. I approached the cave entrance. My flashlight could only illuminate a few inches of the solid black wall. I hesitated, placing my hand on the dark curtain, an unusually chilling sensation. It was icy cold. A flicker of anxiety seized me before I pushed all thoughts from my head and stepped through the curtain, ready to face the unknown. I felt as if I had just stepped through a threshold from a warm room into a cold, harsh place. The temperature here was significantly lower and felt otherworldly. I shone my light around, glancing at the uneven surfaces of the cramped walls, which barely allowed enough space for me to squeeze through sideways. I looked back, but was astonished to find the black curtain was gone, replaced by a solid rock wall. It was all part of the test. I had known this would happen. I turned my face towards where the passage led and continued through the passage, no matter how narrow it was. Do not stop to listen to sounds from afar, and do not turn back if you hear noises behind you. I began walking through the cave. The steady sound of water drops falling to the ground echoed through the space. The flashlight beam only illuminated the path for a certain distance ahead. Beyond that, it merged with the darkness, giving me a distinct feeling that I was walking down an endless hallway. Very quickly, I began to hear something like a dull thud somewhere far away, as if a rock had fallen to the ground. It came at different amplitudes and intervals, never predictable. Soon after, other sounds began to blend with the existing noises. At first, I couldn't identify what I was hearing, but the more I listened, the more I discerned something like footsteps, as if someone was steadily walking through the cave. These sounds came from far ahead, but occasionally they would echo from behind me. I had to use all my willpower to force myself not to look back, while trying my best to remember the instructions. Do not stop to listen to the sounds. Whatever was creating those noises seemed not to like this, because before I realized it, the sounds grew louder, closer, and more frantic. The walking footsteps I heard earlier now became a frantic run, as if a child was deliberately stomping their feet on the rock surface to make sure everyone heard them. The footsteps behind me seemed to synchronize with my pace, right on my heels. And then there were coughs. At first, somewhere very far away, echoing throughout the cave and bouncing off the walls, but as I advanced, they grew louder and louder until it sounded like someone was coughing right next to my ear. I kept going. I started to jog slowly, ignoring the chaotic sounds. My heart pounded in my chest. The cough sounded very familiar. I knew it because I had been forced to hear it daily. My thoughts unconsciously drifted back to the bitter time Alina and I had shared, and I knew it was the influence of this place, not my own will. "Sir, did you hear what I just presented?" The elderly doctor leaned forward, staring at me with a compassionate curiosity. I felt nothing, like when one is hit and doesn't feel pain immediately, but it comes later. The murmuring of hospital staff exchanging information and patients chatting filled the hallway. I vaguely nodded at the doctor and said, yes, I heard, doctor." How much longer does she have?" I felt a lump in my throat trying to utter those words. The doctor shook his head like a disappointed parent. "I'm afraid the prognosis isn't good. A few months at best." The pain hit, and it was so intense I had to brace myself against the wall to keep from collapsing. My stomach churned. This was really happening. A few months, that wasn't enough time. We had so much to do. "Thank you, doctor, I'll tell her," I said. "Tell me if you need anything else," the doctor said, placing a sympathetic hand on my shoulder before leaving. I stood there for 5 minutes before deciding to go back to Alina. My legs wobbled, barely able to support my weight. She was sitting between two elderly women on a waiting room bench, cradling a coffee from a vending machine in her palms, warmth slowly rising from the cup. When she saw me approach, she looked up, smiled, and ran a hand through the stray strands of hair on her face. "Hey," she said, but I could see the worry in her, even through her smile. "What did the doctor say?" In the cramped cave, the sounds around me were so loud I felt like I was in the middle of a crowded area, and with every second they grew louder. I put all my strength into running as fast as I could through that narrow passage. The flashlight beam bobbed up and down with each stride. And then, as if by magic, all sounds suddenly disappeared. The footsteps, the coughs, the rustling, all went silent. The narrow passage opened into a vast area inside the cave. I shone my flashlight around and saw countless natural rock pillars scattered everywhere, in all shapes and sizes. They looked crude and uneven. Some reached so high that my flashlight couldn't illuminate their tops and were as thick as tree trunks. Others were only half my height. I lowered my flashlight and looked around, unable to see anything in the pitch darkness. I slowly turned to my right, trying to discern the faintest trace of something contrasting with the night. And there, it was a tiny white dot, barely visible, a beacon of hope in the deep abyss surrounding me. I steadied my breathing as I reached into my pants pocket and pulled out the crumpled paper. Once the passage opens into a large area, seek the light. Follow it, using your flashlight to keep anything around you at bay. If the flashlight starts to flicker, run. I sighed and put the note back in my pocket. I took out Alina's photo and looked at it under the light. In this dark and hostile place, her face brought me solace. I felt I needed to gaze at her image a little longer to remind myself of my original purpose for being here. I gritted my teeth and gently put the photo back in my pocket, then started walking towards the tiny dot in the distance. Less than a minute into my walk, I heard the first set of footsteps. It sounded like someone running barefoot not far to my left, and when I shone my light there, I saw nothing but jagged pillars and darkness. I continued walking and heard another series of footsteps, again from my left. I quickly swung my flashlight over, and this time, for an instant, just before it disappeared behind a pillar, I saw a shape. I couldn't make out what I'd seen because it was too fast, but it looked like a gaunt, human-like figure with a protruding spine against grayish, stretched skin. I sped up and now heard footsteps to my right. I turned and saw a similar grayish silhouette darting behind one of the smaller rock pillars. It was hunched behind it, but because the pillar was too narrow, I could see the creature's shoulder and legs sticking out. It looked emaciated, just skin and bones. A much faster series of footsteps echoed from behind, and I spun around but saw nothing. When I turned back to face the creature hiding behind the pillar, it was gone. My steady, heavy breathing filled the space, making me feel like a sitting duck, surrounded by these unimaginably grotesque things. I glanced towards the white dot. It looked larger now, but barely. I might not even be halfway there. Suddenly, I broke into a light jog, frantically swinging my flashlight around towards the footsteps that seemed to emanate from everywhere. Their echoes traveled through the air, always maintaining the same distance from me. I saw the gaunt, grayish shapes growing bolder, daring to leave their hiding spots more often and only retreating behind pillars when I shone my light on them. I heard barefoot feet rushing towards me. I turned just in time to illuminate a small, emaciated monster with tiny black eyes and a sharp-toothed, clawed maw for a mouth. The creature shrieked, a sound like screeching tires. It covered its face and immediately retreated into the darkness. By now, I was running in utter panic. I aimed straight for the white dot. It was very close now, no longer a dot but something like a crude doorway. It emitted a faint white light, beckoning me, and I needed no further invitation to run towards it. The rock pillars began to thin out and eventually disappeared completely, and I knew I had to run faster. Once their cover was gone, these creatures would become desperate. Run towards the light and do not stop until you have run through it. I heard dozens, hundreds of tiny footsteps trailing close behind me, their ear-splitting shrieks sounding like the bloodthirsty desperation of a hunting beast. My light began to flicker, but I ignored it. The white door grew larger and larger, and before I realized it, I had run through it. I felt the cave floor disappear beneath my feet, felt myself plunging headfirst into a deep pool of water, while the sounds of my pursuers grew fainter. A splash echoed. For a brief moment, my entire body was freezing cold. Everything around me was completely muffled. I felt the frigid water fill my mouth, and the sudden realization that I could drown here sent me into an indescribable panic. I held my breath and swam in the direction that seemed most likely to lead to the surface, praying I wasn't diving deeper. A few seconds later, another splash echoed, and the sounds around me were no longer muffled. I took a deep breath, my breathing ragged more from panic than the fear of drowning. I shone my light around, feeling the cold penetrate my body. I had to get out of there immediately. I saw a solid surface nearby, so I used my remaining strength to swim to it and pull myself out of the water, falling onto my back, breathing heavily. I felt temporarily relieved, knowing I was safe for now, so I allowed myself to close my eyes for a moment. Alina was sitting upright in bed. She was staring out the window, morning sunlight streaming through the pane and onto her pale face. I was sitting on the edge of the bed. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, placing my hand on her thigh. Even through the blanket, I could feel how thin she was. She looked at me and smiled. There were heavy bags under her eyes, and her cheekbones protruded on her emaciated face. Despite all that, her smile remained as vibrant, hopeful, and positive as when she was healthy and full of life. "I was just remembering our trip to Iceland," she said, her voice hoarse. "Ah, yes, around this time last year, wasn't it?" I said. I guess we won't be able to go back after all, huh?" She tried a strained giggle, but the sadness in her voice was clear. I swallowed, unsure what to say next. She sighed and said, "It's a shame. I really wanted to see the northern lights again." Suddenly, I was overwhelmed by an intense sadness. "Don't say that," I said. "We can still go to Iceland this winter." She gave me a smile, clearly telling me she knew I didn't believe that. She placed her hand on mine and said, "I'm feeling a bit tired now. I think I'll rest a little." I opened my eyes wide and sat upright, feeling more exhausted now than when I was fleeing those grotesque things earlier. I took the photo from my breast pocket. It was wet, but still intact from the fall because I had wrapped it in plastic. Seeing her smiling face brought relief to my heart and renewed my motivation to continue. It was unfortunate that I hadn't thought to protect the note in the same way, because when I pulled it from my pants, the paper was soaking wet and damaged, the ink smudged into unreadable characters. I threw it away. It didn't matter, I had memorized the entire note. I picked up my flashlight, silently commending myself for buying a waterproof one, and continued forward. Hang in there, Alina asterisk, I thought, but in reality, I was encouraging myself. After swimming out, there will be only one path forward until you see a bridge. Something will be on the other side of the bridge. It cannot see, but it can hear, so it is important to cross it silently. Do not run, even if you are very far from it. It is necessary to maintain as much distance as possible between yourself and it before proceeding to the next step. The glittering cave walls gradually converged around me until I was once again in a narrow passage, and then they suddenly opened up, and I faced a vast, seemingly ceilingless area. I hesitated, taking a few steps forward, and saw an old, rickety rope bridge with frayed ropes and rotten wooden planks. I shone my flashlight downwards, but saw nothing but endless darkness. I would have to cross the bridge. There was no other way. I gripped both sides of the rope and tentatively placed a foot on an old plank to test if it would collapse under my weight. I placed my other foot in front of the first and continued this way, slowly and steadily. The bridge creaked with uncertainty, making me pause every time it made a sound. I had expected the ropes to snap or the planks to break at any moment, and myself to fall straight to an unavoidable death. I didn't know how long I would fall before hitting the ground, or if I would have enough time to wallow in my helplessness before death arrived. Although the bridge seemed endless, I reached the other side much sooner than I expected. It felt wonderful to stand on the rough rock surface of the cave, to feel solid ground once more. However, my joy was short-lived until a wheezing sound echoed in the air before me. I raised my flashlight and shone the light around, but once again, I was met only with darkness. It was difficult to pinpoint where the wheezing was coming from, as it reverberated throughout the cave. I stood frozen as the sounds gradually grew louder. The wheezing was interrupted by a sudden, dry cough, then continued as before. My thoughts unconsciously returned to the final moments with Alina. I wished I could say we enjoyed those last moments together, but we didn't. Chemotherapy had made her increasingly irritable, and being near her was truly unbearable. "Could you please stop chewing so loudly?" Alina asked impatiently from her bed, her voice a little harsh. I stopped chewing my scrambled eggs and slowly put my fork down to look at her. She had lost all her hair, even her eyebrows had fallen out. Her face was ashen, like a thin, fragile sheet of paper, gaunt, her cheekbones and eye sockets hollow on her face. Her body was so thin, so weak, weighing less than half of what she used to. It was hard to see how she had become this way a woman who was once so active, healthy, and energetic, now the complete opposite of her pre-illness self, unable to do the things she loved. She stared at me, her face stern. Her plate of food on the nightstand beside her was untouched. "I'm sorry, my love," I replied meekly. This wasn't her first outburst, and probably not her last. I had grown somewhat accustomed to it, but her words sometimes hurt me. I tried my best to endure, but I spent less and less time in the room with her. I simply couldn't bear to see her like that. In the following days, she grew weaker. She couldn't eat anything, and then she couldn't even speak. I knew her time was running out, so in those final moments, I stayed by her side, holding her hand, while she lay in a semi-conscious daze, only able to wheeze when awake. She wasn't fully alive, nor fully dead. I spoke to her, but she didn't respond. I couldn't even remember our last conversation. She couldn't even return the squeeze of my hand. And finally, one day, she simply didn't wake up. I spent hours in the room with her, holding her cold hand, staring at her, feeling numb like a ghost. And then the pain came, and I was swept away by waves of emotion I had never been able to suppress in my entire life. It was the worst I had ever felt, and I begged God to bring her back, to swap places with us, to give me just one more minute with her. But of course, those things never happened. The wheezing was so close now that I expected something to jump out at me. It didn't happen quite like that, but I did see a shape emerge from the darkness. I had to cover my mouth with my hand to keep from gasping aloud when I saw the grotesque thing staggering before me. My flashlight illuminated a woman hunched forward, except that, from her appearance, the thing wasn't really human. It had long, wet black hair, cascading down past its face to almost mid-chest. The thing was so thin I wondered how it could even stand. Its body was wrapped in a ragged brown cloth, and as it took another step closer, I realized it was a hospital gown. Its wheezing filled the space, growing louder with each step. I stood frozen in place, too terrified to move an inch. The creature stopped, its chest heaving as it breathed, and then it turned its head towards me. At that moment, I realized it had no eyes. Where its eyes should have been, I saw stretched skin covering two deep, hollow sockets. The creature seemed unresponsive to my flashlight, which danced erratically across its face in my trembling hand. I closed my eyes and held my breath. Tears now streamed down my face. I had to be silent. The creature turned to its left and continued walking very slowly, each step looking as if it struggled to move. It dragged its bloodied feet across the stony ground with scraping sounds. As soon as it was a significant distance away, I cautiously tiptoed forward, still holding my breath. I kept the flashlight pointed at the creature. Now, its steady wheezing echoed throughout the space. In my panic, I accidentally kicked a pebble on the ground. It rolled away with an alarming clatter. I froze, rigid. The thing took a deep, loud gasp and simultaneously shrieked, jerking its head in the direction of the sound. It started to run much faster than I thought that frail body could. The wheezing was now shallower and much louder. The thing stopped right where the pebble had rolled. It turned its head left and right with a curious expression, its fingers clenching in a way that could only signal it was about to attack with its long claws. The creature sniffed the air several times before it let out a frustrated whine and staggered back to its previous position. I slowly exhaled, almost out of breath. I continued forward while the wheezing once again filled the space. I had a glimmer of hope when I saw something that looked like a door not far ahead. I wanted to run, but I had to follow the rules. The creature was too fast. Gradually, the breathing behind me grew fainter, and I silently thanked God for that. As I got closer to the door, I saw a glowing red light emanating from within, bathing everything inside in an eerie hue. I stopped at the threshold and then slowly turned around. I shone my light back and saw the creature in the distance, facing away from me. I turned back towards the door. Once you have passed through the door at the end, the creature will detect it. It will know because it will scream. Run. Run as fast as you can and do not stop until you are through the next door. So I did just that. The moment I took a step across the threshold, I started to run frantically. An inhuman shriek echoed behind me from the distance, followed by a flurry of rapid footsteps and intense wheezing. The lights I had seen earlier were now brighter, located on either side of the room, illuminating a path in the center. I ran across it, feeling the temperature rising. The shriek was right on my heels, and I almost tensed, bracing to feel its hand grasp my ankle and pull me back, but I refused to stop running. The room transformed as I ran through it. The vibrant red light suddenly illuminated thick tubes, hospital gowns, and countless IV bags hanging from the cave ceiling. I heard the beeping of ECG machines and the murmuring of what I knew were doctors echoing throughout the room. And then I saw many people in the distance, hundreds upon hundreds of emaciated, sickly figures dressed in hospital gowns, staggering forward like ghosts. Some dragged their IV poles behind them. Others were in wheelchairs. All were moving in one direction, disappearing far into a grotesque mixture that looked like giant, black, rotting lungs. The sound of respiration filled the space as the lungs inhaled and inflated, and then, as they exhaled, they splattered large drops of blood onto the ground in front. As I ran closer, I realized they weren't lungs at all. They were countless human beings, all fused together into a lung-like mass. With every passing second, new arrivals merged and clung to other tormented souls. I knew these were the souls who had tried to pass the test, like me, and had failed. I knew this was what awaited me if I was caught. I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to get out of here, but there was nothing in sight, only a single path straight ahead. I was starting to lose hope, and then I saw a hallway ahead and a massive iron door opening inward. Blinding white light radiated from it. The creature's shriek was still right behind me, and I started to think it was playing with me. I leaped through the light, completely enveloped by it. As quickly as it blinded me, the light suddenly vanished, and the door slammed shut behind me with a loud bang, followed by a violent thud against it that made me jump in terror. The scratching, wheezing, howling, and pounding on the door lasted for several long seconds before gradually fading and finally disappearing completely. I let out a huge sigh of relief, still amazed that I had managed to survive this far. I made it. Once you have passed through the door, speak with the guardian and make your wish. I turned around. I was in a dark room, but this place was different. The floor and walls looked straight and flat, as if man-made, not crude like the rest of the cave. In the center of the ceiling, a blue light cast down, illuminating a figure seated on a rock. I couldn't clearly see who or what it was, but I could tell it was draped in a black cloak. It was looking down, revealing no distinct features. I hesitantly approached the figure, my heart pounding in my chest. It casually raised its head as if it had only just noticed my presence. I couldn't see its face, as it was completely covered by shadow, but as it leaned back, I could see two grayish, bony arms with thick veins protruding, like an old man's hands. It spoke in a slow, dry whisper. "So, you have completed it, haven't you? Do you wish to revive the dead?" "Yes, I have completed all the tasks. Now I wish to bring my beloved back. She was too young, had too much left for her, but she was taken from me too soon. I want to live a life with her that we never got to live," I said with a clarity and confidence that surprised even myself. I had rehearsed that sentence in my head countless times before. I had envisioned this moment, but I never thought it would come true. The guardian shook its head, a blow straight to my gut. It continued, "You misunderstand. It is not so." It spoke slowly, each word sending shivers down my spine. "Wait, no. The rules stated we could bring loved ones back. I completed the challenge fairly and justly," I said, feeling afraid because I had seen in the previous room what grotesque things this creature was capable of. But my desire to bring Alina back was even stronger. The guardian sat motionless for a moment before saying, "I will give you 3 choices. You may choose one. The first choice, you can bring your loved one back, but know that she will not be as she was. I can bring her back, but I cannot cure her illness. Therefore, whatever consumed her in her previous life will continue to do so when she returns from the dead, causing her to live an endless life of suffering. In the end, she will merely become a walking corpse. The time you spend with her will be a nightmare, and before it ends, she will beg you to end her, and you will do so with eagerness. Is it worth it, then, to bring her back?" My heart sank to the pit of my stomach, but I continued to listen. "The second choice is to turn back time. You can return to those happy days when she was healthy, but know that you will change nothing, for everything is written by fate. She will die again, and you will have to experience that bitter end once more." "What's the third choice?" I asked impatiently, feeling my whole body tremble. The guardian paused again before saying, "You can meet your loved one for a short time. I will connect the two of you, and you can say goodbye to her." "That's all." It didn't answer. I felt tears welling in my eyes. I had come this far, all for nothing. I couldn't bring her back, and yet I would still willingly go through this hell 100 times over if it meant seeing her face for even a moment. The first option was not ideal, as it would only prolong the torment for both of us. But what about the second? What if the guardian was wrong and I could asterisk change the sequence of events? No, I couldn't. The guardian was telling the truth. Somehow, I knew it in my heart. "I choose the last one," I said with utmost determination. The guardian leaned forward, and I couldn't tell if it was staring at me. A moment later, it made a gesture with its hand in the air. A shimmering blue mist appeared before it. The mist spread, slowly filling the room until I could see nothing else. Everywhere I looked, I felt as if I were floating in the sky with countless stars. "David," I heard a voice from behind me, a soft, gentle voice, a voice that sounded like music to my ears. I spun around and gasped. Alina was standing before me, no longer gaunt and sickly as the last time I saw her. She was radiant, as beautiful as the day I took her picture on that cruise ship years ago, with rosy cheeks, perfect hair, and an enchanting smile. She wore a pristine white dress that seemed to glow. No, it was Alina herself radiating an inexplicable, divine aura. I rushed to her, hugging her tighter than I ever had in my life. I felt the warmth of her body as she returned my embrace. I felt all my burdens lift. It felt like home. I kissed her for a long time, unable to tear myself away from her lips, the lips I had yearned for night after night. When I finally broke the kiss, I realized I was crying. "Alina, my love, I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." She gently wiped my tears. She cupped my face with her hands. "Don't, David, there's nothing to be sorry for. We both knew how it would end. Even though our time was short, you made me so happy, and I'm so glad to see you again. It feels like so long. Living without you has been so hard. I miss you every day. She nodded in understanding. She caressed my hair. I know you blame yourself, but nothing that happened was your fault. It was fate. Someday we'll be together again, I promise. You can't just stop living without me. You're all I had. We could have done so many things together. I had so many plans for us. Without you, my life has no meaning. Fresh tears welled in my eyes, and she wiped them away again. I wish I could freeze this moment and be with you forever like this. I wouldn't even care if I had to live in that damn cave and survive by eating mushrooms. I just want to be with you, no matter the cost. Your time here is done, but yours isn't. You still have so much ahead of you. You have to live your own life, and when it ends, I'll still be waiting for you. But until then, you have to promise me you'll keep living. She gave me a worried look, and I knew we didn't have much time left, so I nodded and said, "Okay, my love, I promise." "And David," she asked. "Ahem. Remember to jog twice a week." We both smiled, a bittersweet mix. I felt happy and sad at the same time. She kissed me, and as I held her, I felt her drifting away. She was moving, no, she was floating backward and slowly rising towards the sky. "I have to go, my love. They're calling me back," she said. No, please don't go. Stay here with me." I tried to reach for her, but she seemed oblivious to my presence. She looked around at something I couldn't see, a smile on her face. The sky began to change color, and suddenly it was covered in countless green membranes like painted waves on a canvas. The patches of color filled a portion of the sky, and Alina gazed at them with delight and joy, with the same simple appreciation she had in life. She looked down at me and said, "David, look. It's the northern lights." We smiled at each other before she turned back towards the sky and gently said, "I always wanted to see them one more time. So beautiful." The sky around me began to darken. I watched Alina's pure form in a state of enchantment and a sense of finality. "I love you, Alina," I murmured to myself as her aura gradually dissolved into the night, and I returned to the dark room from before. The guardian was gone. I collapsed and cried for what must have been several hours. The pain in my heart was even more intense than the day she died. I wanted to die right then and there and cross over to the other side with her, but I couldn't. I had promised her. When I had regained my composure, I looked around. There was a faint light coming from behind me. I followed it and found myself back in the forest at the cave entrance. It was daytime. Birds chirped. A gentle breeze whipped at my face. I looked back, but instead of the entrance, I saw a solid wall. I walked back to my car and took out Alina's photo. "You'll always be with me," I said, pressing the picture to my chest.